Swati. Hi, Carl. Are you there?
Yeah.
Michael,
Yep.
this is Dr. Carl. He works with us.
Okay. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, sorry, my camera is not on right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm at home, but
Okay. Me too.
see you. I look forward to
See you.
hear from.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Same.
Michael, shall we wait for 1 minute or shall we start now?
Okay. It's fine. We can wait 1 more minute and then, yeah.
Yeah, we will wait for 1 more minute
Okay.
and then.
Very good.
Okay. Let's start. Acharyah Pavanosmakam Acharyaani च Bharati Devo Narayana Shrisha Devi Mangala Devata. Namaste. Good evening, everyone. I'm Srinivasan Acharya, Associate Professor and Head of the Department of Philosophy, as well as the Coordinator of the Dvaita Philosophy Resource Center at Mahe Manipal University. We are glad to have Dr. Michael Williams from the Austrian Academy of Sciences, who has been working in the Dvaita Vedanta system of Indian philosophy for more than a decade now. He is here to deliver the Madhvanavami special seminar on Dvaita epistemological concept Sakshi, one of my favorite research topics in philosophy. On this occasion, at the outset, I offer my obeisance to Vyasa and Madhva because of their profound discursive philosophical wisdom we can engage, explore, and experience the systematic worldview of Vedic thoughts. We are at a critical juncture of discoursing and advancing Indian knowledge systems and global philosophy, rather than merely preserving it for its museum mummified value. In this case, the Western philosophical themes and discussions have penetrated the world's humanistic, scientific, and technological spectra by conducting a scientific investigation of human nature, existence, and experience and presenting a systematic inquiry into understanding the interaction between self and the world. However, our strides are yet to take such a gigantic leap of advancing globally relevant discourses based on the Indian philosopher's wisdom. I would like to recall the words of the renowned scholar Dr. B.N.K. Sharma from his celebrated work, History of the Dvaita School of Vedanta and its Literature. If, in quotes, if Indian philosophy is to be accepted as much more than an interpretation of certain basic texts and traditions, though not as completely detached from them, attempts should be made to present the various systems of thought and their logical, epistemological, and ontological foundations and their metaphysical superstructures in their architectonic unity. The philosophical system of Madhva and his commentators have not received adequate attention from this point of view. Therefore, in this context, for over a decade, we at Manipal University have been constantly working on enhancing the global environment with philosophical exchange rooted in classical and contemporary traditions and nurturing the intellectual climate with aspirants and scholars interested in philosophy by embracing transdisciplinary perspectives through our academic studies and research programs, doctoral masters, courses like Bhagavad Gita, which will be commencing from tomorrow offline or hybrid based on the responses, projects like Mahe Mahabharata and others, events, text reading seminar or workshop sessions being conducted with Austria, Toronto, and others, and publications that were brought out through MUP. This seminar is such one. I welcome Dr. Michael Williams, the speaker, and all the audience gathered for the session. Dr. Michael Williams, a scholar in Indian philosophy, obtained his MPhil in classical Indian religion from the University of Oxford in 2008. He completed his PhD at the University of Manchester in 2012, focusing on the Madhva School of Vedanta. He has contributed to projects editing Nyaya text and studying Navya Nyaya's impact on Indian thought. In 2018, Williams joined the Austrian Academy of Sciences, delving into Vaishnava devotional philosophy in South India from the 14th to 16th centuries. His research encompasses Vaishnava traditions, Navya Nyaya's influence with metaphysical debates, aiming to understand their intellectual evolution and relationships. Notably, Williams has co-authored chapters on Jayatirtha and Raghunatha Shiromani for the Oxford Handbook of Indian Philosophy. In his forthcoming book, Metaphysics and Epistemology in Early Modern Madhva Vedanta, he explores the defense of realism given by the philosopher Vyasatirtha in his Nyayamrita. Presently, he directs the project titled Truth, Knowledge and Metaphysics in Three Traditions of Vedanta, conducted under the auspices of Academy. Personally speaking, Dr. Marcus Schmucker, Dr. Michael Williams, and I have been engaged in a text reading session on Dvaita polemics. In this, I observe certain researchers' passion and commitment towards the classical system, which is awe-inspiring and could be learned by many of our young and middle-aged folks. In the post-colonial era, we should come out of the Euro or West-centric worldview in humanities, science, and other knowledge domains while starting to rediscover ourselves, sowing a cultural renaissance. I am grateful that Dr. Williams agreed to share his views on the Dvaita system on this platform. I hope it could lead to potential and healthy discussions about the system that many might not be aware of. We would have been happy to have Dr. Michael Williams in person here, but due to certain concerns, the seminar is being organized online, and I guess Dr. Williams will visit Manipal soon. Over to you, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and I completely agree with everything you said, about the importance of studying Madhva. Dvaita Vedanta in the contemporary period as a world philosophy. So I'd like to thank you for asking me to speak today, Srini. And yes, I was hoping to be with you in Manipal, but unfortunately bureaucracy intervened. But I do hope to join you soon. And I hope you can all see my slides. So
Yes, we can.
you can see, great. Okay, so what I want to talk to you about today is, as Srini said, the Dvaita or the Madhva tradition of Vedanta. But I want to talk particularly about something that we've been working on together, which is knowledge and consciousness in the Dvaita tradition. And actually what we're reading mainly is Vyasatirtha's Tarkatandava, particularly about the concept of the witness or the Sakshi. So I hope I can give an overview of that today for you. So as Srini said, I was just going to briefly introduce myself. So the current project, as has been said, is Truth, Knowledge, and Metaphysics in 3 Traditions of Vedanta. And this is hosted by the Austrian Academy of Sciences and is also funded by the FWF, I should mention. If you want, you should be able to click on this. This is the project website. Perhaps I can put it in the chat or something later. But we do have a website if you're interested in finding out about the kind of work we're doing on the project. So the 3 traditions of Vedanta referred to in the title of the project, in case you're wondering, are the Dvaita, Advaita, and Vishishta Dvaita traditions of Vedanta. So the 3 main Vedanta traditions that were operative in the medieval and what's called the early modern periods in the history of Indian thought. We're working from about philosophers from all of these traditions. So we're working, my colleague Marcus Schmuka really specializes on Venkatanatha, Vedanta Deshika from the Vishishtadvaita tradition. We're also looking a lot at the works of Madhusudana Saraswati and his Advaita Siddhi in particular, as well as, for instance, Dharma Raja from the Advaita tradition, and also Jayatirtha, particularly from the Dvaita tradition. But the main focus textually falls on Vyasatirtha. When I put his dates there, these are the dates given by Krishnamurti Sharma, who's still the leading historian of Dvaita thought. And he believes on the basis of actually the dates of a famine and on the basis of the dates of Vyasatirtha's guru, his Diksha guru, Brahmanya Tirtha, he dates into 1460 to 1539. Vyasatirtha, as you know, is a member of the Madhva, which are the Dvaita school of Vedanta. I use those 2 terms interchangeably, Madhva and Dvaita. So Vyasatirtha was many things to many people. He was a philosopher, a poet, and a prominent political figure in South India. So he didn't write so much poetry in Sanskrit, but I think he wrote a lot of poetry in Kannada. And he was the guru of Purandaradasa and Kanakadasa, 2 of the most prominent Haridasa figures. Besides being, his intellectual work, he was an extremely prominent political figure in South India, and a lot of recent research is driven by his political engagement with the Vijayanagara empires, particularly of the Salava and Tuluva dynasties. There's undoubtedly he enjoyed a very close relationship with them, and he was the most prominent figure in the Madhva tradition during this period. However, our work really approaches Vyasatirtha primarily as a philosopher. So as a philosopher, as a great thinker who has everything to contribute to what's increasingly being called global philosophy, or the move to incorporate Indian and other forms of thought into this global conversation or discourse. I've described him as a highly philosophical theologian. So there's no doubt that Vyasatirtha was primarily a theologian, if we want to use English terms. His primary concern was understanding the nature of God, or Vishnu Narayana, through scripture, through the Veda particularly. But his work is highly philosophical. So he was, one thing that my own research focuses on about Vyasatirtha is the extent to which he was influenced by the Navya Nyaya tradition. So the tradition beginning with Gangesha Upadhyaya in Mithila. And partly due to this influence and partly due to his background in the Madhva school, he was highly philosophical. And if you look in his Nyayamrita, for example, he always tries to prove things using reasoning as well as reasoning, as the interpretation of scripture. So this is why I describe him as a highly philosophical theologian. I want to show just a quick picture. This is from Nava Vrindavan Island. I guess many people will be familiar with this place. It's on the Tungabhadra River near Hampi, the site of the Vijayanagara Empire, or the capital city of the Vijayanagara Empire. Vyasatirtha has the most prominent tomb of Vrindavana amongst the 9 tombs on this island, and this obviously reflects his importance to the Madhva tradition during this period. Okay, so just Srini has already commented a lot on the study of Indian philosophy, and I completely agree. Just to go over a few points. So what people are increasingly talking about in the field is a move to global philosophy. So this is to get away from the European heritage of what is called philosophy and to move from the study of Sanskrit and Chinese, for example, philosophical texts as being just curiosities or philological puzzles to be solved, to appreciating them as actual works of philosophy that can speak to contemporary concerns and which can expand the horizons of philosophy in general. And the figures who I personally associate most with this, and there are many others, but just to name some names, is, for example, Matilal, Jitindranath Mohanty, Janardhan Ganeri, Ram Prasad, and so on. So these are people who are increasingly interested in Indian philosophy, as a source of interesting and compelling arguments and perspectives on philosophical topics that can speak to contemporary concerns and which should be incorporated into modern philosophical discourse. One thing I would note is that there has, in the last, say, 8 or 9 years, there has been a big increase in the interest in the contributions that Vyasatirtha and the Madhva tradition made to Indian philosophy, particularly in what's called the early modern period. So this is about 1500 to 1800. So in the 20th century, Vyasatirtha's work was certainly studied by traditional scholars. There were certainly quite important works written on him, for example, by Krishnamurti Sharma and Das Gupta, but his thought didn't really receive the attention that it deserves, I think, when we look at his importance to the history of philosophy in India during this period. But this has changed actually since about 2015. You have a number of scholars, particularly from the USA and Canada, and I'm thinking of people like Valerie Stoker, for instance, Lawrence McCree, who is also working a lot on Vyasatirtha, my own work, of course, and the work of various other people, who are really starting to appreciate Vyasatirtha's importance in the history of Madhva Vedanta. And this is actually being driven a lot by his historical importance. Of course, we have for Vyasatirtha the Vyasa Yogi Charita, which is a really important biography. It was written by a contemporary of his, Somanatha Kavi. So we know a lot about his political influence. And these scholars are often being drawn in the USA and Canada by an interest in his historical importance. But as I say on the project, we're focusing on him again as a philosopher, and yeah, we're working primarily on the death dance of logic, which is how I translate the Tarka Tandava. And this text, as I already said, was mainly written against the Gangesha Upadhyaya. And actually, in some manuscript witnesses that I managed to obtain, we're looking for manuscripts of the text, obviously. And from Tanjore, I found that in one text it's actually called the Mani Khandana. So it's simply the refutation of the Tattva Chintamani of Gangesha. And that actually led to it being misclassified as a Nyaya text, but that's actually another story. Okay, so what I want to talk today about is primarily Vyasatirtha's epistemology, but I think it's important to have some background in what he believes as a theologian, as an exegete of Vedanta texts. And Vyasatirtha believes that Brahman is Vishnu Narayana. And we would say that Vishnu Narayana in English is God with a capital G. So at the beginning of the Nyayamrita, he says Nityalaguna Nikayam Nitya Niraduta Heyam, two predicates of two descriptions of Vishnu Narayana. And this essentially means that he is a perfect being, so he's a being possessed of all positive qualities, and that he is Nitya Niraduta Heyam, he is devoid of all flaws. And the most important, perhaps, of all Vishnu's flaws, for all Vishnu's virtues for Madhva, is his swatantrata, so his complete self-independence, self-dependence or independence. The rest of reality, and this is a very important distinction from Madhva, the rest of reality is dependent on Vishnu in some way or another. And that includes us, the individual souls, and the empirical world, the world that we experience through our senses. And of course, Vishnu Narayana takes on various earthly descents, so avatars, beginning perhaps within the Madhva tradition. The most important is Vedavyasa, who is also taken to be Madhva's teacher. As you probably know, Vyasatirtha's philosophy is based on a strong rejection of the Advaita Vedantins. So these are the Vedantins who follow Shankara, Mandana Mishra, and so on. And the Dvaita Vedantins believe, of course, that Brahman is non-dual impersonal consciousness, as opposed to a personal god like Vishnu and Narayana. So one of the things, this is actually, the current project is a follow-up project to a previous project. And on the previous project, we looked at Vyasatirtha's debates with the Nayayikas. But we also looked at how he argues in the Tarkatandava that we cannot know God through pure inference. So Vyasatirtha is committed to inference. He accepts it as a pramana. But he doesn't believe that we can use inference independently, swatantra anumana, as it were, to prove things about the existence of God. The Nayayikas obviously do. They believe that we can prove the existence and nature of God through inference, and that is one of the major debates in the early Vadas of the Tarkatandava between Vyasatirtha and the Navya Nayayikas. And I'll talk about that in a short while. But for Vyasatirtha, it is the Veda that is the main source of knowledge about Brahman. And what I want to ask today is, how does Vyasatirtha prove in the Tarkatandava that we can trust the Veda as a source of knowledge about Brahman? And this is questions, obviously, of epistemology. So the Madhvas and the Nayayikas are both Brahmanical traditions. They accept Chatur Varna Ashrama Dharma, obviously, and they also defend in different ways the validity of the Veda.
14 days, 2 weeks immersive workshop into the art of creating stories.
Hello? Okay, so there's just a, yeah. So there are these are two Brahmanical traditions. And the question in the early chapters of the Tarkatandava is, how best do we defend the Veda? So one way of thinking about this is that we all imbibe different forms of beliefs and knowledge from our traditions. So we learn things through education, we learn things that are communicated to us by elders, and for Brahmanical traditions particularly, we learn things from the Veda. And the question that Vyasatirtha is asking at the beginning of the Tarkatandava is, what is knowledge? And how do we tell the difference between knowledge and falsity, or truth and falsity? So how do we know that what the Veda tells us about how we should act and about the nature of Brahman, how do we know that it's true and not false? And I made a little diagram just to help. So both Vyasatirtha and the Nayayikas tend to think, in terms of the Vaisheshika ontology about what knowledge is, and they tend to ask the question in this way. So, under this ontology, you have the Atman, which is the self. This is the Jivatman, the individual self that is ultimately mine and your natures. This self tends to have jnanas, or cognitions, beliefs, and one of the properties that jnanas can have is pramatva. And this really, I translate as truth or knowledge. It's been translated in various different ways, but I think truth and knowledge are actually very good, both very good interpretations of it. And as you can see, I'll talk about, so Vyasatirtha believes that both of these things are apprehended through the witness consciousness, but I'll talk about that shortly. So truth is a property that can belong to our thoughts under certain circumstances, and it often does, as Vyasatirtha points out. The next question, before we get into epistemological questions, is, what is truth? And I would say that the Madhvas, Jayatirtha and Vyasatirtha and the people who follow them, they tend to believe in a conformity theory of truth. So what I mean by this is that Paramatma is yatha artatva. And as Jayatirtha makes it clear, in the Pramana Paddhati, this means is simply the fact that an awareness conforms to or is similar to its object. So he says something like Jinayam Maneti Kramya Vartamanam Yathavastittam Eva Jinayam Yad Vishayi Karoti Nanyatha Tat Pramanam. So a pramanam is something that a knowledge is something that takes its object to be as it is without violating or transgressing it. Annatikramya. So it's very simple, I think. And I mean, this basically describes the Nyaya position as well. So if I'm looking at this thing in front of me and it's a table, I have the awareness, this thing is a table. And if it really possesses the property of being a table, then my awareness is knowledge. It counts as true knowledge. If, on the other hand, I believe the thing in front of me is a giraffe, then this is false knowledge. So it's just a matter of the awareness conforming to its own object. And there are other, and Vyasatirtha himself does actually defend a slightly different theory of truth, for example, in Zupadi Khandana Mandara Manjari commentary. He actually defends a kind of similitude theory of truth. But I think in the Tarka Tandava, this is the theory of truth that is in the background. And this essentially, it applies to the Nayayikas also. So Gangesha believes the truth is Tadvati, Tat Prakaraka Anubhavatvam. So being an experience, a direct experience that predicates X of something, a property of something that really has that property. And essentially, I would say that these two are very similar, at least, theories of truth. So for the rest of this talk, what I want to ask is really the question, how do we detect knowledge status? Or which is really, how do we know that we know? And this is, as I say, very closely related to the question of how we defend the Veda. So how do we know that the Veda is a valid means of knowledge? How can we trust the things that it tells us about God and about how we should behave? So one of the most important distinctions in epistemology in India is really between what I'm going to translate as intrinsicism versus extrinsicism. So, you could say that these are theories about knowledge, but actually they're more like families of theories that incorporate various particular perspectives. So intrinsicism, which is how I translate Swatah Pramanya Vada, intrinsicism is the view. It's the view usually held by the Purva Mimamsaka. So this is the followers of Prabhakara, Murari Mishra, and Kumarila Bhatta, as well as the different traditions of Vedanta. So despite their own internal differences, the Advaita, Dvaita, and Vishishta Advaita traditions of Vedanta all believe in some way in the intrinsicist approach to knowledge, which is, as I say, Swatah Pramanya Vada, even though they all have slightly different interpretations of what this means. Extrinsicism, on the other hand, is really, by the time, we're talking about the early modern period, the 16th century onwards, extrinsicism as an approach to knowledge is really only represented by the Nyaya school, particularly by the Navya Nyaya school. So this is the Nyaya school from Gangesha onwards. It was, I think it was represented, for example, by the Buddhists before this, but certainly in the period that we're talking about, it's only represented by the Navya Nyayikas. And the early chapters of the Tarka Tandava are really about Vyasatirtha refuting the extrinsicist approach to knowledge and trying to establish that his own intrinsicist approach to knowledge, his Swatah Pramanya Vada, must be true. So the extrinsicists, which again during this period means the Navya Nyayikas, argued that we need to confirm all knowledge through inference. So if pressed with the question, how do we know that we know? The Nyayikas would say that we can only really be sure that we know something, that our awarenesses count as knowledge, through inference. And for the Navya Nyayikas, this applies in all cases. So actually the Prachina Nyayikas, for example, Jayanta Bhatta and his Nyayakandali, take a slightly different approach. They say that sometimes knowledge is swatah, sometimes it is paratah, sometimes it is intrinsic, sometimes it is extrinsic. But certainly by the time of the Navya Nyayikas, all knowledge needs to be confirmed through inference. Apart from I think there are a few special cases, but by and large, they believe that we can only know that we know through anumana, inference. So for instance, say I buy a diamond, and somebody says, that doesn't look like a real diamond or something. So I want to test my belief that this thing in front of me, this thing that I bought, is a diamond. And for example, I might subject it to a test, which I don't know anything about diamonds, but I'm told that if you place a diamond in water, it should sink quickly to the bottom of the glass. And this is, I might then make the inference, my judgment that this thing is a diamond is true because it sinks quickly to the bottom of this glass of water. And in this way, I can certify my knowledge. I can say that the beliefs that I have are true by subjecting them to tests and by using inference. So you can immediately see how this approach to knowledge has profound consequences for the Nayayika's defense of the Veda. So as I say, the Nayayikas are obviously a Brahmanical tradition. They believe in the validity of the Veda, as well as the social structures, and it tells us about, and also the facts it tells us about the nature of God. But they, in the early period, they came across critiques from Buddhists, critiques from Jainas, critiques from Charavakas, and so on, the various Nastika traditions, the traditions that rejected belief in the Veda. And their response to this, which is consistent with their extrinsicism about knowledge, is that we need to justify the Veda through inference. So for the Nayayikas, and this is something you see in the Gautama Sutras, the Nyaya Sutras, Apta Upadesha, Shabda Bodha is Apta Upadesha. So verbal knowledge we get from words, is something that is Apta Upadesha. So it is the instruction of an Apta. And an Apta in this context is a reliable person, somebody who's trustworthy, somebody whose testimony we can really believe in. The Nayayikas takes perhaps the more common sense position that the Veda is the word of God. So it's actually authored and created by God. And the word the Nayayikas usually use for God is Ishwara. So, for them to show that if we want to know that we can trust the Veda, we need to demonstrate that God is an Apta, that God is a reliable person, somebody whose testimony we can truly believe in. And this gives rise to the project of what you could call natural theology, or rational theology is also another term that's used in the Western tradition. So in the Western tradition, natural theology really means the project of trying to understand the nature of God using independent reasoning. Which also draws quite a lot on the natural sciences in its contemporary iterations. So this is the practice of going beyond scripture and using inference, using rational reasoning as a way to understand the nature of God. And actually what the Madhvas accused the Nayayikas of doing is swatantra anumana, so inference that is independent of the Veda. So they also call it vedasya ananukula tarka, reasoning that is independent of the Veda. And so from the Nayayika's point of view, once we establish that God exists, we must know that he is omniscient, and we must be able to trust an omniscient being, essentially. So once we can prove through inference that God exists, we know that there is a God and that we can trust him, and thus we can also trust his testimony, which is of course the Veda and everything it teaches us about the nature of the world and about how we should act. So this is the Purva Paksha at the beginning of the Tarkatandava. So the Nayayika's extrinsicist view, Gangesha's extrinsicist view in particular, is the view that Vyasatirtha wants to refute. And the opening chapters, which are very extensive chapters of the Tarkatandava, are devoted entirely to refuting the view of Gangesha and also his followers. So I think as we look more at this text also with Srini, and my colleague Marcus, we become more aware that Vyasatirtha by this point was also aware of Gangesha's commentators. So he's also aware of Yajnapati Upadhyaya, Jayadeva Pakshadhara, for example. There's a tradition in the Madhva school that he had a particularly strong relationship with Jayadeva. And all in all, he gives, and also Vardhamana Upadhyaya, who's Gangesha's son. And all in all, he gives a very deep refutation of this theory that really draws on all, not just on Gangesha, but all the different commentaries on Gangesha to construct a very sophisticated preliminary position, the Purva Paksha, and also to refute it. And of course, he also, draws his main source for his arguments are, of course, the works of Madhva and Jayatirtha also. And he tries to update their works and show that they can stand up to the new arguments of Gangesha and his followers. So Vyasatirtha, as I say, is an intrinsicist about knowledge. And this means, briefly, you could say that as soon as we become aware that about the thought we are having, we become aware of it as true under normal circumstances. So a good place to begin with this is the theory of what's sometimes called prakasha. This is what Jitendranath Mohanty calls it in his translation of Gangesha's Pramanyavada. So there are different theories about this topic of prakasha, but according to Vyasatirtha and the Naiyayikas, the theory of prakasha is how we become aware of our own internal states, of our own thoughts, as it were. And both Vyasatirtha and the Naiyayikas argue that we have a type of internal perception. And the one term mainly used by the Naiyayikas for this is anuvyavasaya. So we have first order perceptions, obviously. So we have, for example, this pot is blue, this thing is a table, my head hurts, and so on and so forth. It seems to be a fact that we can also become aware of these awarenesses. So, for example, I could think, I am currently aware that this pot is blue. I could also then become aware of that awareness. So I could say, I am currently aware that this pot is blue, and so on ad infinitum. But what we're mainly interested in is how we become aware of our own awarenesses. And as I say, this is the theory of prakasha. And both Vyasatirtha and the Naiyayikas agree that the best explanation for this is that we have internal perceptions. So just as I have an external perception of my mobile phone or something, so too can I have similarly, I can have internal perceptions of my own inner states. And actually not all traditions agree with this. The Purva Mimamsakas who follow Kumarada Bhakta, for example, believe that this actually happens through inference somehow. And the followers of Prabhakara Mishra, the Mimamsaka, believe that all awarenesses are self-aware. So an awareness detects itself, as it were. But the view certainly of Vyasatirtha, Gangesha, and also Murari Mishra, the Mimamsaka, is that we have a type of internal perception that monitors our own internal states and allows us to become aware of them. And the key to the intrinsicist theory of truth for Vyasatirtha is that this inner perception normally grasps the truth of these first order awarenesses true. So if I'm having the awareness this pot is blue, and I become aware, I am currently aware that this pot is blue, then the second awareness, unless there is some particularly good reason for it not to, it normally detects the truth of the first awareness. So to become aware that I am aware that this pot is blue, in doing so, I normally become aware that it is true also. And this is, of course, different to the Naiyayikas view. So for the Naiyayikas, we can only, as soon as we also become aware of awarenesses through internal perceptions, but we need to engage in inference, something which is other than the perception itself, to be able to verify the truth of what we perceive about our own inner states. So one thing we're working on again on the project at the moment is how Vyasatirtha believes that we become aware of inner states. And briefly, Vyasatirtha believes that it's because of the witness, the saksha. So the witness is an extremely important doctrine in Madhva Vedanta. Srini has written a great deal on it, and also I think it was Krishnamurti Sharma really appreciated the importance of this doctrine for Madhva Vedanta. So the witness, besides being many other things, is the essence of the individual self. So the witness, in a way, is just another word for the Atman, the essence of the conscious self. And this is the faculty that is responsible for inner perception. So actually, at the beginning of the Tarkatandava, Vyasatirtha says that the witness, Sakshi, is simply Anuvyavasaya, is simply the inner perceptual faculty accepted by the Nyaya tradition. Actually, this isn't strictly true. What he seems to mean is that he's accepting it for the purposes of debate. So he's saying, well, you can just think of the witness as being Anuvyavasaya. And I say this because the witness has many properties that Anuvyavasaya, inner perception for the Nyayikas, doesn't have. So the Madhvas usually say the following things about the perception of the witness. They say that it is inerrant. So in other words, it can never make mistakes. It's infallible. It just doesn't err. They also say, and this is closely connected, that it's incorrigible. So this would be the Sanskrit word abhadya in Sanskrit. Abhadya, indefeasible. It can't be corrected or falsified by a subsequent awareness. It also has the properties, the phenomenological properties of being clear and distinct, and it's also completely resolute. So by that, I just mean that it's not subject to doubt. It never prevaricates about its own perceptions or about the contents of perception. It just knows with complete assurance. So the witness, as I say, is responsible for the cognition, the awareness of inner states. And the point is, for Vyasatirtha, as soon as the witness apprehends an inner state, it automatically detects it as being true as well. And it's never errs in this respect. I should mention also, and this is not so important for the theory, but one of the major differences between the Nyaya and the Madhva views is that the Sakshin is also responsible for outer perception, or at least certain forms of outer perception. So the Sakshin perceives external objects as time, space, and the ether, and it also perceives the fact that they exist. So besides grasping inner states, it also perceives certain substances. And this is interesting because, this is another story, but the Nyayikas believe that we can only infer the existence of time as a substance, for example. Likewise, we can only infer the existence of space as a substance. We apprehend certain things as being in time and space, but we don't apprehend the subjects themselves through perception. We have to infer their existence. The Madhvas say, by contrast, that we can perceive them directly, and this is very important consequences for the theories of time and space. But that is another story. Okay, so the basis of, the strongest case that the Madhvas have that seem to demonstrate what I've just been talking about, which is that the witness apprehends the truth of internal states, have to do with introspective perceptions. And what I mean by this is just the perception like, I have pain in my head, I am happy, I am not in pain. Perceptions about my own inner states. These awarenesses, and this is already argued extensively in Madhva and Jayatirtha, they seem to be things that we could never be in error about. So I can, for example, if I look out at this bottle, for example, I could doubt somehow that it's a bottle. I could say it's perhaps actually not a bottle; it's just a picture of a bottle. I could say I could come up with various explanations about it. So this. Judgments about external things seem to be inherently defeasible, but judgments about internal states seem to not be so defeasible, arguably. So if I'm aware, for example, that I currently have a pain in my head, it seems to be the sort of thing that I couldn't really be in error about. I just know that I have a pain in my head. And of course, this therefore gives an example of things that don't need to be justified by inference. So we could imagine, for the sake of argument, the absurd inference: whenever I have a headache, I rub my head, therefore I have a headache. I'm not saying that the inference is completely invalid, but there really is no need to make it. And this is, a very important point for Vyasatirtha. As soon as the witness consciousness, the witness that is myself, becomes aware that I'm being aware that I have a headache, it simultaneously becomes aware that that is true. It doesn't need to engage in any further inferences to prove it. And this seems to give a very good example of how we can know know things intrinsically for the Vyasatirtha, how we can just know things without the need for any further inferential justification. So just to, I mean, I'm quoted so much from Tarka Tandava itself, but I just want to look at Vyasatirtha's second definition of Svatastvam. So Svatastvam is the property of being intrinsic. At the beginning of the Tarka Tandava, he considers three definitions of this that he finds to be valid, and then goes on to refute Gangesha's own definition of it, which he argues is invalid. For me, the clearest one of the definitions that Vyasatirtha gives is actually the second one. And Vyasatirtha says essentially that to say that the witness apprehends, to say that awareness, the truth of awareness is detected intrinsically, is to say that the witness, the essence of the self, always has the potency, the ability, the shakti, to know that an awareness is true. And so he says the intrinsicality, svatastva, belonging to this or that awareness consists in the fact that it has the capacity to be an object of the awareness of the witness, which awareness has for its object the awareness that bears the validity that is to be grasped. So Vyasatirtha gives a very clear example to demonstrate what he means by this. And he says it's just like the case of fire. So fire normally has the capacity to burn things. We could say it has an innate sahaja shakti to burn things. But he notes that this can be inhibited. So just because it has this potential to burn things, it doesn't always mean that it will do so. And he gives the example of the Chandrakanta Mani. So this is what's usually called the moonstone. And actually, we were discussing this in our readings, and Srini pointed out that it is, we looked it up anyway, and it's a form of, it's kind of naturally occurring aluminium alloy that inhibits the potential of fire to burn. So if you, for example, put your hand on the top of this Chandrakanta Mani and then burn underneath, it resists the heat and stops your hand from being burnt. And this is an example of something, it has an innate capacity to do it, but it can be blocked by certain factors. And the same is the case with the witness. So Vyasatirtha says the witness always has the capacity to know that the awareness, the internal thing it's becoming aware of is true. But this can be blocked. So, for example, if we have doubts about something, or the witness becomes aware that there is a fault, say, in our sensory faculties or a fault in an inference we are making, it can be blocked from detecting the truth of the awareness. So, for example, if I have the awareness, the standard example always given by Indian philosophers about a false awareness is this case where I mistake a piece of mother of pearl for a piece of silver. So in this case, the witness might be blocked from realizing, okay, this awareness that I'm having, that this is a piece of silver is true, because it has some doubts. There are some doubts about it, or because I might suspect that my visual faculty, my eye, isn't working properly. So it has the capacity to do it, but it can be blocked from doing it also. And the reason Vyasatirtha has to, give this qualification, and by the way, this is a qualification that isn't seen in the Mimamsa schools. Vyasatirtha has to say, okay, it doesn't always detect it because it can be blocked. And this is because there are clearly cases of false positives, or clearly cases of true error. So, for example, if I believe that the piece of mother of pearl is silver, I might be really duped by this. I might really get excited, reach down, pick up the piece of mother of pearl, start getting excited about it, start thinking it's silver, whereas in fact it's not, and I'm just in error. So the next question is, well, if you have this perfect, inerrant, incorrigible faculty, which is the witness, why do mistakes occur? And Vyasatirtha's answer is that there are actually two levels of perception. So the first level of perception, perhaps the most important, is the witness itself. The witness's perception is inerrant, incorrigible. It's a perfect, infallible epistemic faculty. However, we are also, as human beings, bound up in samsara. and we are connected. There is another level of awareness which actually belongs to material nature. So this sounds like a contradiction in terms to say that there is material awareness, but actually, you see this in Indian philosophy from the Sankhya school onwards. So rather than belonging to the essence of the individual self, this actually belongs to the manas, the inner faculty, which is actually part of material nature. And what Vyasatirtha says, he follows Madhva and Jayatirtha in this respect, is that all episodes of error must belong to this inferior level of awareness. So it occurs in the mind, the manas, and not in the witness itself. So the witness is the witness, as I say, is perfect, it's resolute, it's never subject to doubt and error. Whereas the mental awareness, the manasa pratyaksha, is subject to such things. So, and any case of error or doubt that occurs has to occur at this level of perception and not the level of the witness. Why? Well, actually, Madhva and Jayatirtha argue that if we didn't accept this, we couldn't explain knowledge. We couldn't explain the fact that we know things about the external world, and we couldn't explain the fact that we act with complete certainty on the basis of our perceptions. And they argue that therefore we, for other reasons as well, but partly for this reason, that we need to accept that there are these two levels of perception. So just to come back as I'm wrapping up to the wider significance of these questions. So I started talking about our knowledge that we gain from tradition, from our elders, from the Veda, from the various sources of knowledge that are available to us as we're growing up. And for Vyasatirtha, this theory really grounds our knowledge of the Veda. So as a Brahmanical philosopher, he obviously believes that we gain the most important items of knowledge that we have through the Veda. And he believes that the only real way to justify this is through an intrinsicist theory, or his intrinsicist theory of truth, as opposed to the Nayayika's theory. And he says, in essence, that we are entitled to believe things unless we are aware of something that defeats them. And in the case of the Veda, and we are, in the case of the Veda, not aware of anything that would defeat it.
Michael, there is some sort of technical disconnect.
Veda.
We are unable to hear you. Hello, Vishnu. Can you hear Michael?
No, I can't hear.
Okay, I think he is not here. I'll call him. He's connecting.
Hello?
Yeah, you went.
All right, okay, it was just me, was it?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, sorry. So anyway, I'll just quickly wrap up then. We're nearly finished now anyway. Perhaps you can. Okay. Can you see the PowerPoint again?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm getting a bit of feedback. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so we don't need to justify the Veda through inference. We can just know that it's true. There isn't anything to really rule it out. And the only thing for Vyasatirtha that could rule it out is that we have some doubts about the speaker of the Veda. But of course, there is no there is no author of the Veda, because the Veda is entirely impersonal. It just exists. So in the absence of doubts, we're entirely entitled to believe in the Veda. So just to contrast this again with the Nyayika's view of things, so the Nyayikas, as extrinsicists, as Paratapramanyavadins, believe that we always need to actively certify our beliefs using reasoning. So as I said at the beginning, we need to do this by certifying that the Veda is written by God, and that God is a reliable source of testimony. And this leads to the rational theology of the Nyayikas. So in essence, Vyasatirtha believes that unless there's something to rule it out, we're entirely justified in believing in the Veda, whereas the Nyayikas believe that we have to really go out and certify things about the Veda through reasoning and through observing parts of reality. And I hope it's clear in the end how the intrinsicist and extrinsicist theories of knowledge give rise to these, or really contribute a huge amount to these different positions about the nature of the Veda. So with that, I will just I will conclude my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for such a complicated topic that you try to narrate it in such a lucid manner. We can open the flow for the discussion. Like, for example, if some people want to ask something or share comment, they're welcome. But at the beginning, I have one basic question regarding when you said that you could consider the truth position that the Dvaita epistemology takes is somewhere closer to conformity theory. Now, keeping the point of view of the criticism from looking at the conformity theory of truth, when in case of the knowledge that we have is anthropocentric, the epistemological worldview we have is anthropocentric, and second thing is that, and also it is subjective. And so for example, the classical example that the Buddhists give is that kunapah kamini bhaksha iti tisro vikalpanaha. So परिव्राट कामुकशना में एकस्याम प्रमदातनो kunapah kamini bhaksha iti tisro vikalpana. So in such a subjectivist viewpoint, what is the response? Because the conformity theory of truth has undergone severe criticism as well. So what do you think would be the response in such a case?
It's a very interesting question. I mean, so it's interesting, of course, by the time Vyasatirtha is writing that the Buddhists have largely disappeared as a philosophical force in India. So, I mean, there were, Buddhists around apparently, at least the time of Madhva. He's supposed to have debated with the Buddhists called Bodhisagara. And the Buddhist position is sometimes represented in these later texts, at least in, for example, in connection with the theory of error. But, I mean, so actually, when Jayatirtha is arguing for this, he doesn't really, he doesn't provide any further analysis of what that means. He just takes it for granted. So, I mean, I say conformity theory of truth. I mean, it's the conformity theory is usually taken to be or what I'm calling the conformity theory is usually taken to be a subtype of this correspondence theory of truth. And I mean, in the Western tradition, certainly is taken as the common sense view. Is taken as the default view that, and the other theories of truth, like the coherence theory of the truth or pragmatist theory of truth and so on, are taken as more sophisticated in a way views. But so for Jayatirtha, he doesn't, he doesn't feel the need to justify this any further. He just takes it as kind of being common sense that this is what truth is. And in the Nyaya tradition, they give a similar definition, which is tadvati tat prakaraka anubhavatam. So being an experience that attributes a qualifier to something that really possesses it, which is more of an analysis, I guess, but which says essentially the same thing. So, I mean, to come back to the question, how would we justify this. I mean, yeah, I mean, so in the Western tradition, like I think this is very closely. I mean, I don't know so much about Buddhist philosophy, but in the Buddhist tradition, there is this view. This is similar to the view about sense data. So in the Western tradition, according to people like Russell and AJF, for example, in his younger days, you don't apprehend the world directly. You just apprehend what is called sense data, which in a way is a form of, I mean, depending on what you view about the ontological status of sense data is, it's either something that exists outside of your mind or something which exists inside of your mind. But the point is that we don't apprehend objects directly. We actually apprehend our own apprehensions of objects, as it were. And this is supposed to explain for example, I can look at the thing in front of me, say I'm looking at what I take to be a tomato. I mean, I can doubt that this thing is a tomato. It might be a fake tomato. It might be made of plastic or something, but I can't really doubt that I'm having this perception of a round red object in front of me. And the sense data theory is usually taken to solve that in a way. But yeah, I mean, as to a general, defense of this, I mean, I think Jayatirtha and Vyasatirtha, maybe you can correct me, but they really take it for granted at this point that we do directly experience external objects, what is really called naive realism in the Western tradition. As for justification for that, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's a separate. I mean, I'm not sure that Vyasatirtha and Jayatirtha by this point really need to really feel the need to justify that, as they because they're not debating with people who would really put forward a refutation of that. The Nyayikas certainly agree that we do perceive external objects, and they just take it for granted that we do as the best explanation for, yeah.
Maybe we could refer to the Vaibhashikas who are Bhakyartha Pratakshattvadinaha. So then they might be able to, what has been their response, and then based on that, anyhow, in case of Dvaita system, it's an ontological real system. So the categories are objectively real. So in that sense, they are immune to this criticism because there is no subjective view. I wouldn't say there is no subjective viewpoint in Dvaita because every individual is unique and distinct, and they have a but at the same time, that the concept that irrespective of individual's epistemological intervention, the object is real at all point of time. That's their metaphysical status. So yeah, if others have any other questions, they may raise their hand or unmute themselves, and then also, if possible, turn on their video. Our students and others.
Yeah, I have one. I just have a question about all Vedantins. Somehow they have to value the Vedas. Are they imagining themselves as a? I mean, imagination is not a good word, but how do we know we have a Sakshi Indriya? Sakshi Indriyas, according to the Nayayikas, Indriyas Anumaya. We have to do Anumana, and then we have to find that we have Indriyas. But existence of the Sakshi, because the entire Tarkatandava session, starts with the Pramanya Satastu. Okay, so all Vedantins are imagining themselves their existence of the Sakshi, or really Sakshis exist or not?
Sure. So I think the Madhwas, I mean, there are different views about what the Sakshin is, of course. And I'm really familiar mainly with the Madhva and Advaita view. So the Madhwas obviously believe that the Sakshin is the essence of the individual self, and that there are an infinite number of distinct individual selves, and that they have also ethical natures. This is the Swarupa, the Yogyata, the Swarupa, and so on. And so these are real, as Srini was saying. The Madhvas are a realist system. They believe that these are real and permanently distinct from one another. The Advaita Vedantins, by contrast, they believe that the Sakshan is obviously something that's created by avidya, by nescience, like the rest of reality. So the Atman, there is only one Atman, and it's divided into, it seems to be divided into an infinite number of different selves due to the effects of avidya. As to how we know that there's a Swarupa Indriya, the Madhvas, I think, would say that it's known perceptually. This is my assumption. Correct me if I'm wrong, but so Srini says, in one of his articles, Sakshina, Sakshi, Sakshinam, Sakshat Karoti. So in the Madhva view, the witness fulfills various different karakas in this expression, and one consequence is that it is self-reflexive. So it's aware of itself. So I assume that one justification would be that we just we must be perceptually aware of the Sakshan. As it says, this we were discussing actually in our readings how this action can simultaneously be the Swarupa and be an Indriya. So it seems to fulfill these roles, different roles at the same time. And I think Srini was saying that this is to, points out that this is the Savishesha Abheda relationship that Madhva postulates. So he believes that there are Visheshas, distinguishing features that allow us to refer to two things that are actually identical as being distinct from one another. And this is the reason that the Sakshan can simultaneously be the individual self, the knower, and also be a kind of Indriya, a kind of an instrument that is responsible for the arising of knowledge. To come back to your question, I think the main point is that the Madhvas would say that this is established perceptually, as opposed to just inferentially by the Nayakas. As you say, the existence of the Chakshush and so on has to be established for the Nayakas through inference, since these things are actually atomic in magnitude, so we can't directly perceive them. But yeah.
There are two questions. One is from Mr. Madhav Kulkarni and another one is Mr. Shreyas Kolpe. So the first question is about the applied philosophy of, in case of Indian philosophy. So how do these Indian philosophical principles or tenets, like for example, from the Dvaita point of view, what is the, for the betterment of universe, in the sense universal prospects, how these philosophical concepts would help in a global philosophical discourse or in other worldview sense?
This is a really interesting question. It's a very big question. The Western, I was reading actually Descartes recently, the Meditations, and for him, the question is very similar. Our cultures, we live in a world with various different cultures, belief systems, and our culture imparts to us a lot of beliefs. We, as a result of growing up in our culture, we obtain various beliefs, whether it's from the Veda or from our elders or from our education system and so on. And the question is that Vyasatirtha and the Nayayikas are asking here is what responsibilities do we have? What epistemic responsibilities do we have to justify this? Are we entitled to believe in what our traditions, our tradition tells us without any further inferential justification if we're not aware of anything that rules it out? Or do we have a responsibility to go out critically scrutinize these beliefs and to engage in critical conversations with people outside of our culture? So to me, once you pose the question in that way, it becomes a question of universal significance. It is an answer to perhaps one of the most important philosophical questions. So, and I think that these viewpoints of Swatah Pramanyavada and Paratah Pramanyavada, obviously they find analogs in the Western tradition, but the Western tradition hasn't, it has similar concerns, but it hasn't addressed the questions that we're talking about in these terms particularly. So I think that the Indian philosophical context can add a completely new perspective on these issues, and to help us expand, the range of ideas that we have about them.
So there is another question on the status of the Vedas authorlessness, aporushayatva. So is it only Nastikas or? Yeah.
So the Veda Parushayatva is really found in the Vedanta and the Mimamsa schools. It's not just the Nastikas who doubted it, the Naiyayikas also doubted. So as I was saying in the talk, the Naiyayikas believe that the Veda is authored, and that the author is God, who is an omniscient being. So it is doubted from within Brahmanism also. So the Naiyayikas in particular, the Nyaya Vaisheshika school, they don't believe that the Veda has an author. But certainly it's common to all the Mimamsa schools and also the Vedanta schools. But obviously it's doubted by the Nastikas. And unlike the Naiyayikas, the Nastikas, the Charvakas, the Bauddhas, the Jainas, and so on, they deny that the Veda is valid as well. The Naiyayikas accept that the Veda is valid, but they believe that it's authored by God.
There is also another question from the same person, Shreyas, is that what is the difference between aporushaya to be translated as impersonal or unauthored? So what are the implications in understanding?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. So, I mean, impersonal, I think, is a good translation because it emphasizes that it's not created, it's not authored by any being, regardless of whether that being is a human being or whether it is God. As to whether it's unauthored, I think that, Jayatirtha discusses this, for example. I mean, what exactly does it mean to say that the Veda has no author? And so God and human beings obviously have a role in transmitting the Veda. But they're not actually the authors of it in the sense that Kalidasa, for example, is the author of Shakuntala. Kalidasa is the author. He arranges the aksharas in a particular way with particular intentions in mind, whereas according to the Madhvas and the Mimamsakas, the Veda simply exists and it always has existed as part of reality. So it needs to be transmitted, but it isn't authored. So that's why I was talking about the authorship status of the Veda.
Our master student, Harsha, he has asked a question about there are two, you mentioned that two levels of perception. One is infallible, incorrigible, and the second type is that the perception that belongs to the material awareness. So how does Sakshi perceives this? Is it through Indriya or other tools?
I don't think it needs. I assume it just perceives it directly. So it certainly doesn't need any intermediate like eyes. It certainly doesn't need an abhaya an external sense faculty. Because it is the swarupa indriya, it is the internal faculty. So again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it perceives it directly. So if I have this awareness in my manas, this awareness, this is the table rises, then the witness directly perceives that. It doesn't need any intermediary, I think. Paroksha Dhyana, I believe. Okay.
There is one more question. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah. This is an interesting question because it relates. I mean, as we were talking about, in our readings. I mean, this is the theory of the Sakshan is at once a theory of consciousness and a theory of self and personhood. It's also a theory of, as well as being a theory of knowledge. So it's both of those things at the same time. And as you say in the Madhva tradition, this is something that comes up a lot in Sripati Acharya's discussion of this issue. In the 19th century, I think Sripati Acharya is a 19th century Madhva philosopher, and as you say, so in the Madhva tradition, there are different types of individual selves according to their ethical natures. So there are Oh no, these are more the gunas, but so in the Madhya tradition, there are these views that you have the nitya samsarins, people who are eternally bound to samsara. Then you have mukti yogas, people who ultimately can obtain liberation at some point, and then you have tamo yogas, people who are who are destined for the darkness, who are destined to to go to naraka, one of the forms of hell. So. I mean, it's interesting that that in the Madhya tradition there are these two. This is a theory about the nature of the individual self, and this is also a theory about the nature of knowledge. And I think that the Madhvas also have an elaborate hierarchy. You see this in the Pramana Lakshana, for example, of the different types, the different degrees of knowledge that can be obtained by the different degrees of being. So I think this is my impression from reading the Pramana Lakshana, that depending on the ethical core of your soul, depending whether you're mukti yoga, tamo yoga, or nitya samsara, and you can obtain different degrees of awareness. So if you are a mukti yoga, someone who can ultimately be liberated, you will have a superior level of knowledge, ultimately, and clarity to someone who is a tamo yoga. So I think in the Madhya tradition, it's also and as you say, this is something that you can't change. So if you say jiva yogyata can't be changed, this is certainly true of the Madhya tradition. I mean, you just happen to exist like that. It's been compared to Calvinism, but I think there are problems with that comparison. I mean, in Calvinism, this Christian sect, I mean, God determines what your salvific status will be from the beginning of time. So when he creates your soul, God either creates you as decides that you're going to be the sort of being who can experience eternal paradise, or he just accepts that you're going to be destined for hell. And in the Madhva tradition, I mean, it's not God that creates, the soul. It's as you say in the comment, it's this is just your beginningless ethical nature. So if you're mukti yoga, if you're destined for liberation, your soul has always been that way, and it always will be that way. And similarly, if you're tamo yoga, if you're destined for hell, then that's just the way you are. And there's nothing, as you say, anybody can do to alter that. But certainly, I think this also has implications for what level of knowledge you can attain. If you're a mukti yoga, my impression is that you can obtain a superior level of insight as opposed to someone who is tama yoga, for instance.
I guess there is one more question.
Yeah, I mean, so for Vyasatutta, the obtainment of liberation. Okay, my understanding is that you obtain liberation because you obtain an aparoksha jnana, a direct awareness of the nature of God, but this itself doesn't liberate you. It just pleases God, and like in the other devotional traditions, it's ultimately God who liberates you. So the first thing of the Sakshan is that it grounds the Veda itself. So the only way we can really obtain knowledge of God in the Madhya tradition and in the other traditions of Vedanta is through the Veda. So one of the main implications is that by having this theory of the Sakshan and by having the theory of Swatak Pramanyavada, is that we can really defend the Veda as a source of knowledge, and ultimately that we can defend it as a way of ultimately becoming liberated from samsara by truly understanding the nature of God. So it has this indirect implication in what I'm talking about. And of course, the theory that if we talk about the Sakshan, is it's also the essence of the individual self. I mean, then one of the main implications is that you can only obtain liberation if you're destined to do so, as it were. Can everybody hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, I just got a message saying it was. But anyway, yeah. So I mean, if you're, in the Madhva tradition, liberation is only open to certain types of people, and those are the Mukti yogas. If you're a Nitya Samsara, a person who's destined to spend eternity in samsara, you're not eligible for liberation. Likewise, if you're a Tama yoga, somebody who's destined to hell. So that is another implication of the Madhva theory of the self, the individual self as the witness. Okay, so Srini, do I have time to answer one more question? Or?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. I just check because there seems to be some audio issues. So yeah, I mean, this is as has been said, this is the way I'm talking about it now is in terms very much of analytic philosophy and so on. I certainly don't think this is the only way of approaching Indian philosophy. I think that the work of I'm really deeply influenced by the work of Matilal and Jatindranath Mohanty and so on, and their work was to a large extent a reaction against the work of pioneers like Sarvepalli Radhakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, who wanted to present perhaps a more spiritual or a more idealistic, in many ways, side to Indian philosophy, and they tended to focus on Advaita Vedanta, for example. So I certainly think that Indian philosophy and global philosophy generally is much broader than simply just analytical philosophy. But yeah, I mean, I think it's also perfectly valid to study these aspects of Indian philosophy and to present their importance to a wider public, because I think for me, any view that kind of essentializes Indian philosophy, that says it is idealistic or it is analytic or it is blah blah blah, is problematic, because it's in the same way that describing European philosophy in such terms would be problematic. I mean, it's a very wide conversation, a very wide collection of discourses, and essentializing them is going to be problematic. But I do think that this aspect is definitely there, and I do think that it's very important as we go forward to draw out those aspects of Indian philosophy that are analytic and to put them in conversation with modern analytic philosophy.
Maybe we conclude. Vishnu, if you are here, maybe you propose the vote of thanks and we conclude.
Yeah. अनंत कल्याण गुणैक राशिम अशेष दोषोज्झितम अप्रमेयम मुमुक्षुभिः सेव्यम अनंत सौख्यप्रदम रमेशम प्रणमामि नित्यम अर्चिकल्पितकल्पोऽयं धृत्यर्तिगजकेसरिः व्यासतीर्थ गुरुर्भूयात् अस्मदिष्टार्थ सिद्धये श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः. A very good evening to each and every one of you. It is the immense gratitude and pleasure that I stand before you today and extend our heartful thanks to all those who have made this philosophy research seminar on knowledge and consciousness in Dvaita tradition of Vedanta research success. First and foremost, our sincere appreciation goes to Dr. Michael Williams, Institute for the Cultural and Intellectual History of Asia, Austrian Academy of Science, Austria, for delivering an enlightening and thought-provoking presentation. Your presentation style is to convey the most complex subject easily. We extend our gratitude to the Department of Philosophy, Faculty of Liberal Arts, Mahe, Manipal University, for the taking the initiative to organizing this seminar, and Dr. Vidwan Srinivasa Acharya, Associate Professor and Head of the Department. We are thankful for your vision and leadership in bringing together such a distinguished gathering of scholars and students. And special thanks goes to the our colleague, Dr. Karl, and also everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If recording is available, it's good.
Yeah, it's streamed in YouTube. It's there.
Okay. can you send the link of YouTube? Couldn't search it on YouTube.
You just search for Department of Philosophy Manipal in YouTube. You will get the link.
Sure.
Okay.